In this video, I'll be making a March dress by Helen's Closet. Since this is my first time doing this level of color blocking, I copied one of their sketches into Photopea and tested out my planned colors to make sure it would have the desired effect. For pattern modifications, I added some length to the skirt, but I made some mistakes when determining the length, as we'll see later. I made it a bit too long. With that planned out, I separated all the pattern pieces by which fabric they'd be cut in, and started cutting. The floral bodice part of the dress is lined with interfacing, which I do think helps it keep its shape under the weight of the linen skirt, which ended up being quite heavy. Then the sleeve cuffs and the inner layer of the bodice where the V-neck will be cut are interfaced. In order to get a uniform fold on the outer bodice layer, I traced the margin and then ironed down the crease. Pattern weights always make this process a lot easier, and I highly recommend having some, if only for this. I don't always see the importance of stay stitching, but for really flowy and fluid fabric like this linen, I think it's pretty critical to do this step to make sure the fabric stays in place and keeps from moving. So if you're using a similar fabric, don't skip this step. Finally, we can move on to the assembly process. As per usual, we attach the front and back bodice at the shoulder, and then we finish our seams. Then we repeat this process for the outer layer of the bodice. Then comes the somewhat tricky process of lining up the two bodice layers at the neck. I think having a more structured fabric as the outer layer really helped keep the bodice in shape. I had some problems with the linen moving around too much, and I think having a more solid layer to pin and sew to made this easier. Even though it's not strictly necessary for the next step, I think you should fully pin the two layers together to make sure everything is straight and lined up for when you cut the slit, which is sort of a point of no return. Once everything's pinned together and your center line is drawn, the soon-to-be slit is stitched around and then very, very carefully cut. And make sure you don't snip your stitch line. Then the piece is turned right side out and the edge is ironed down to lay flat. Now it's time to finish stitching the outer layer of the bodice to the inner layer. First is attached to the neckline to keep everything lined up until the necktie is installed. Then the outer layer is pinned down to the inner layer, making sure that everything is laying flat and there's no bunching or pinching. Then it's stitched down. I used a contrasting thread that matched the orange of the main dress because I thought it would make a slightly more interesting look. Then the first part of the step that I enjoy the least, gathering. I stitched two gathering threads using not quite my longest stitch, and then I gathered the sleeves. I usually overgather quite a bit and then expand the fabric once the edges are pinned in place, and then I stitch the sleeve to the shoulder edge. Then of course I finish my seams. I usually think these serged edges are a bit irritating when wearing a top, especially if they get twisted, so I stitched down my finished edges to keep them flat. Then I repeated the process to gather the lower edge of the sleeve. Now I absolutely love this floral fabric that I got. I got it at a local thrift craft store called the Craft Box, if you're ever in Denver, and I was excited when I noticed how well it matched the linen I got for this project. I just love the way they look together. But anyway, for the sleeve cuffs, which have already been interfaced, I fold them in half and iron them down. And then I folded one side down again, which will help finish the inside edge of the sleeve later. Then the cuffs are each sewn into a loop. Careful not to stitch down the ironed-in folds. Then they're ironed down again into nice clean loops, and the folds are reinforced with more ironing. Then stitched the lower gathered edge of the sleeve. And then to finish the sleeve, we stitch in the ditch to tack down the inner edge of the sleeve, enveloping our messy seams in the fold.
So I finished the top part, and this is my first time doing like really drastic color blocking, so I was a little unsure how this was gonna go, but I think I'm actually liking it. And I think the sleeve is really fun with the little cuff, but we'll see how it looks with the skirt once I attach that, and then this part, once I add the straps, should fold down like this. Get my phone out of the way. Should be like that. So I think that's pretty cute.
Then the pattern recommends pre-folding your hem before it's gathered, which I think is great when you didn't actually make your skirt too long, and would then have to later take some off the bottom, therefore completely getting rid of all of the work you did ironing down the hem. But ignoring that, the lower skirt is then gathered and attached to the upper skirt. I think you get the picture by now of this whole gathering process, although this particular part did take up a lot of space, so I ended up having to move it to the floor. Now we're nearing the home stretch. The sides of the skirt are then pinned together, stitched together, and then finished. And then I got disheartened by the sudden spring snow and stopped sewing for a few weeks. But once it warmed up, I finally moved on to gathering the top of the skirt and attached it to the bodice. I really don't enjoy gathering, but it just looks so nice in dresses. Now, thinking I'm almost done, I try on the dress, and then once again been thwarted by my height. Now, devastated, I take a large chunk off the bottom of the skirt. There's no way I was going to seam rip the finished edge and regather the lower skirt. So then I had to refinish the edge of my skirt, and it's the same process before, so I didn't record it. Now, moving on to the necktie tassels. They're stitched together at an angle to make one long strip, and then folded and ironed down, similar to bias tape. Trying to keep everything centered, one edge of the necktie is pinned and stitched down to the unfinished neckline of the dress. Then the tie is sew closed, and a knot is tied in the end. So, how do you think it looks? I love how it turned out. It's heavy but breathable summer dress. Perfect for these low humidity summer days when it's cool in the morning and evening but warm during the main part of the day. It's incredibly comfortable and I think it looks really cute. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.